I think people have a tendency to believe that I overhype cards a little too much, when in reality, it's pretty much the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, I actually tend to believe that most cards are garbage, but I don't really cover them in my videos. When I do talk about a card, it's because it's completely broken, and I want to cover what it can actually do. Today's card discussion will have a different approach though. And yeah, it's about that new Maxi coming out in Infinite Forbidden. Everybody keeps talking about it. I wonder why. But I like to call it Maxi at home because realistically, that's kind of what it is. But in all fairness, Maxi is an extremely overpowered card, so simply being comparable to it is already a feat. Now, what does it actually do? So if you control no cards, you can discard this from your hand at any moment, and for the rest of the turn, each time your opponent normals or special summons a monster from the hand, you draw one card. With that said, the card does make you shuffle back cards from your hand back into the deck during the end phase if you have way too many cards in your hand compared to your opponent's field. Hypothetically speaking, let's just say that you got 10 cards in your hand at the end phase and your opponent has 3 cards on the field. There is a 7 card deficit, so you have to shuffle back 1 card from your hand at random again back into the deck. Deadass, I think the only way this can happen is if your opponent vomits his entire hand and then, I don't know, like, board wipes himself. And honestly, if that happens, you're the winner, so who cares about that drawback? Anyways, the topic you've all been waiting for: how good is this card against the meta? Obviously, let's start with Snake Eyes, because even though it's the most hated deck, it's also the most played deck. So Moch Mummy can draw you anywhere between 1 to 3 cards depending on how they play it out. They've got their main normal summon Snake Eye Ash, which obviously this is an immediate draw 1, and then they got the Populist, and then they got the Abel Star. Issue is, if you're drawing 3 cards, it means that your opponent has gas for days, and he's probably doing everything uninterrupted, and all you're doing is you're going +2, and you're letting your opponent full combo. So yeah, he's generating like 6+ interruptions while you're going +2, so I don't know who's the real winner here. Would you rather use other hand traps like Veiler, Imperm, Droll, Nibiru in order to prevent the board from being too broken? Or are you okay with your opponent full comboing and you drawing a bunch of cards? After a bit of theorizing, I realized that if you're drawing a bunch of cards with Molchami, the best way to really capitalize off of that is to rely on board breakers instead of other hand traps. Which I do not recommend, by the way, because of the prominence of the Fiendsmith engine, which can throw out floodgates on your ass. So again, board breakers are rather weak, but that's another subject for another video. Now, I already explained in the past how Phantasme was kinda mediocre with other hand traps, but pretty good with board breakers. So the reason for that is because the timing for Phantasme can be really awkward. So for example, if your opponent goes normal summon Snake Eye Ash, and you don't have the Veiler yet in your hand, but you're about to draw it with Phantasme, it doesn't matter, you have to let your opponent do a lot of plays before you can resolve that Phantasme and then dig into the hand traps, and by that time, the hand traps are potentially dead. Mochami is kind of like in the same boat, because if you have that and other hand traps, you're in a position where you either draw a bunch of cards but let your opponent play, or you're giving up on draws but also stopping your opponent. So at the end of the day, Mochami almost all the time will just trade 1-for-1 with your opponent by being like an upstart goblin. But it's also an upstart that is really bad at multiples and that you can draw for turn and doesn't do anything on your own turn. So yeah, to sum it up, I do not see Mochami as a good solution against Snake Eyes. Because again, it's pretty bad against the Fiendsmith engine, and that will be everywhere this format. Unless you plan on drawing a bunch of board breakers or vomiting all of your hand traps at the very end of the combo, which I think is completely unrealistic, because that would imply that you got like Nibiru and Veiler, and it's really risky to hold them until the very end to use them. Again, not a big fan. Anyways, how about Yubel? I mean, it's not bad. You can draw a card for their normal summon, the Samsara D Lotus, and then another one for the Grave Squirmer, and a third one for the Sharvara. That's pretty much the 1-card combos, so it translates to 3 draws, which puts them in the same category as Snake Eye, because they also play the Fiendsmith engine, and they also make a completely unbreakable board, so you really don't want them to full combo. I want to say, if anything, Yubel is probably even more dangerous than pure Snake Eye if you let them go uninterrupted when they go first. I'd rather much stop them really early on, instead of letting them full combo and then drawing a bunch of cards just to hand trap them at the very end when it doesn't matter anymore because they got Phantom of Yubel. Anyways, time to move on a more positive note. I think Mochami has the potential to be extremely good against Flunderies, potentially one of the best hand traps. They have to summon at least 3 times from the hand in order to tribute summon 1 single monster, so you're always plussing even when they're not trying to do like that much. This works in your favor because unlike the other decks, you can actually afford to live without playing other hand traps, and you can draw into board breakers and do a great job against Flunderies. This is unlike Yubel and Snake Eyes, where you kind of have to stop their turn 1, otherwise you're gonna have to deal with like a completely unbreakable board. Flunderies does not play the Fiendsmith engine, obviously, so all you really have to be afraid of would be Shifter or Featherstorm. That's pretty much it. Fortunately, Mochami is usable under these shifters, so that's already a big plus. Now, the last deck I think Mochami performs extremely well against would be Ritual Beast. This deck does not play the Fiendsmith engine, that I know of at the very least, so at least relying on board breakers can be really good there. You could evenly them for heavy damage, which I think pairs really well with Molchami because for both of them, you gotta control no cards anyways, which means that it's just a going second play. And not gonna lie, Ritual Beast summons a ton from the hand. Someone once told me that their like maximum theoretical amount of normal summons was around like 5 or something, assuming they used all their effects. So obviously if you draw 5 cards off of Molchami, you're in a pretty good spot. And it's even more if your opponent summons the Nemesis monsters, so that would be like an extra 2 draws. Because yeah, some of them do play Colossus or Arch-Nemesis Protoss, which is kind of scary, but if you draw into Board Breaker, you should be kind of fine. Deadass, if you start your turn with 10 cards in your hand, regardless of what deck I'm facing, I'm usually kind of confident. Unfortunately, this is all theory because in practice, you're usually just drawing 2 to 3 cards and your opponent can still make a decent half board. But this is where Molchami is still good because it forces them to make a weaker board if they don't want to make you draw a bunch of cards, just like Maxi. So unlike Snake Eyes against Flunderies and Ritual Beast, I want to say Molchami really does feel like a Maxi-esque card. And also, it's not like anyone can do anything about Molchami resolving. They can, I guess, ash it, but they can't really cross out it unless they play the Molchami going first, which is kind of stupid. And immediately passing to Molchami basically just means that they have no play, which is, again, really good for you. Or maybe they're just bluffing. Look, I don't know, some people are just weird. Overall, Molchami is not the kind of card I can consider to be the next Maxi because you can't main deck it unless you're playing like Go Second Tenpai Dragon, and you can only use it when you control no cards. Therefore, Molchami is more of a side deck option, which is, you know, only really a thing when you're going second post game 1, which means 1 game out of 3 maximum. Being a 3 of, you're only drawing it 33% of the time in your opening 5 going second, and since you're only seeing it 1 game out of 3, you're really only seeing Molchami once every 10 games on average. Not to mention that the real probability of this happening is much lower because you're not trying to side Molchami against the Snake Eyes and Yubel decks because it doesn't really perform that well against them. I mean, you could, but then again, it's just not gonna be super impactful unless you're really trying to dig for board breakers. So yeah, the real utility of Molchami is probably like 5% of your games, which I just don't think is good enough. And considering the fact that this card can be a hit or miss and doesn't really solve anything on its own, so I'd say it belongs in the same category as Phantasme as being a really good niche card, and it could be good over time, but at the current moment, it's maybe just not ideal. So yet again, in conclusion, I do not believe that this card is garbage because I was definitely able to find a lot of positive characteristics about it. But it definitely is not game-changing, and I don't think it's gonna have that much of an impact on the game as of yet. But yeah, anyways, that's all I had for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about the new Maxi-esque monster Molchami Pearlia in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.